But the biggest villain any of us are ever going to truly have to encounter is the one that lies between our own two ears. And I'm a firm believer that once you overcome the villains around you, you can address the one that's within you.
Welcome, my guest, Heather Monahan. Heather is a top podcaster, acclaimed keynote speaker, entrepreneur, and the founder of Boss in Heels. Heather has achieved a great deal of success, including being named one of the most influential women in radio. Thrive Global named her a limit-breaking female founder, and also she was recently named top 50 keynote speakers in the world in 2022. Heather is also the author of Confidence Creator and her newest book, Overcome Your Villains, Mastering Your Beliefs, Actions, and Knowledge to Conquer Any Adversity. Heather Monahan, it's so great to see you again. As I was mentioning, I didn't see your face when we first did our interview because the first 50 episodes approximately, I wasn't doing video. And finally, I'm like, I got to do the darn thing. I don't care if I don't feel confident doing it. I got to do it. So luckily, I get to see so many beautiful faces and have these conversations. So it's just so nice to see your face. So thank you.
Well, thanks for having me back on. And, that's life, right? It's all about the evolution of growing and changing and doing things differently. So I'm right here with you. When I first launched my podcast, I refused to do any interviews unless they were in person. And then when the pandemic hit, that rule went out the window, and now they all are done via Zoom. So it's so funny to see how things can change so quickly.
And you just have to step into the uncomfortableness and just grow within that experience. Why were you only doing in person? Because I would think, is it because your background that you always did talks in person that you just felt most comfortable doing that? Just out of curiosity.
No, my expertise and my business experiences in sales and sales leadership. And one of the things that I preach to every team I've ever worked with is you must go face to face. The relationships that you can form, the opportunities that you can create. I went face to face to interview Jesse Itzler in Atlanta. And because of that, when they asked, oh, hey, who do you guys want to interview Sarah and Jesse live on stage at a marketing conference? They said, oh, Heather Monahan, because there's a different rapport and connection that, 99.9% of the time when I interview someone in person, they give me their cell phone number. They tell me to get a hold of them. They tell me when they're coming to Miami versus, this is a great example, really nice person. Jenny McCarthy had me on her show. And as soon as the time ended and the interview ended, she said, all right, bye. And the computer closes, right? So that's more the norm, is that when you are not in the same space with somebody, that it's much more transactional.
I completely agree. That's happened a couple of times where people are just like, okay, bye. I'm like, wait, I wanted to connect more. But yes, I could see that being the case. But yes, we have to adjust and pivot into this new space. So at least we could connect with people that are across the states, which you're in Florida, I'm in Los Angeles. So it's such a pleasure that we get to this experience as well.
Absolutely.
Well, okay, you were back on my podcast about a year and a half ago, and you mostly talked about your previous book, which was Creating Confidence. So we focused a lot about that subject. And I know you now have your newest book, which is Overcome Your Villains, which I could see right behind you. It's so exciting because I know your first book was self-published, and we talked a lot about that. And now this is a published book. So it's a whole different experience, I know, for you. But before we jump in all that, I know you shared your story on the first episode, which I'll plug it in the show notes as well. But for those that are listening right now that aren't familiar with Heather Monahan, can you share what has been the catalyst to get you in this position, writing 2 books now, being a paid speaker, keynote speaker, successful top podcast host, and all the things?
I was in sales, as I mentioned, my whole entire life. I started a paper route when I was 9, and started bussing tables and then waitressing and bartending. And so I've been in sales my entire life, literally since I was 9 years old. And, through that journey, I just always believe that there was just this one path and one course for me, because like many people, if you're good at something, you assume, oh, this is where I'm supposed to be. I'm not supposed to be doing anything else. And so for me, that lane was always corporate America and moving up, in the corporate America track, which I did really, really well. I ended up in the C-suite, after being in the media business for over 2 decades, and things were good in regards to what I had developed and created from a work standpoint. However, I was working side by side with a woman that despised me. And for a long time, I just, did not pay attention to her. She was a CFO, I was a CRO. And so we were kind of on, opposing sides. She always wanted to save money and cut expenses. I always wanted to spend more money and reinvest in our people, our products, and our customers. And so I just kind of dismissed it as, oh, this is part of, doing business. But in the end, she ended up becoming the CEO when her father became ill, and she fired me immediately. And that was 2 weeks after I was named one of the most influential women in radio at the end of 2017. And so that moment was a really pivotal moment in my life. I had never been fired. I'm a type A overachiever. And I decided to do something a little drastic. I posted online, I've just been fired. If I've ever helped you in any way, I need to hear from you now. And that post went viral, and it landed me on the Elvis Duran show. And halfway through that show, he shared with me that I was obviously writing a book, but I had never even thought about writing a book. All I had ever thought about was staying in sales leadership in corporate America. And he opened my mind to the possibility that maybe you could be good at one thing, but that's not all you're good at. Maybe you could take those unique skills and talents other places and apply them and still be successful in other arenas. So I decided to double down, take the chance, and go to work for myself. And I wrote and self-published my first book, Confidence Creator, which when I was searching for ways to sell the book and trying to discover, because I was a rookie, I had never done anything in the literary world before. I had no idea what I was doing. So I would Google a lot of different things, and I had Googled, how do you sell books? What's the most effective way to sell books? And it said to speak. And I thought, that's great news, because I've been speaking for 2 decades, right? I had taken stages with, tens of thousands of people. I had just never been paid for it before. I didn't even know there was a paid speaking business. And so I felt really confident calling and cold calling companies saying, hey, if you bring me in, all you have to do is buy my books, and I'll come in and give a talk around innovation and confidence in the workplace and collaboration and how to unify your team. Everyone would say yes. Everyone would say yes, until one day someone said, well, what's your speaker fee? And I had no idea what a speaker fee was. So I went back to Google, and I discovered Gary Vaynerchuk at the time, and this was 2018, 2019, was getting paid $350,000 for a 60-minute keynote. He's getting paid a lot more now. But at that time, I thought, wait a minute, if I have been doing this for the past 2 decades instead of working for somebody else in corporate America, I'd be a multimillionaire right now. I could have been making more money had I leaned into this speaking thing that I didn't even know was a thing. So that's when I really redirected everything I was doing and went all in on the speaking business, and gave my first TEDx talk, and that was promoted to TED, and started really, finding some success in the speaking business until 2020 hit, and it just disappeared overnight. My entire year, which was booked solid, was canceled overnight. And so that was a really scary time. And I decided to reinvent myself as a virtual speaker, which I didn't even know what that really meant. I just saw online people were calling themselves virtual speakers. And so I, gave that a shot. And then ultimately I was named top 40 keynote speaker of 2020. And then I was just named 2 weeks ago, top 50 keynote speaker in the world for 2022. So it's been an interesting ride to bring me to where I am today.
So amazing. Well, congratulations for all those awards. That's so phenomenal. And I'm so happy to hear that, because you are a very powerful speaker, and you show up confident, most importantly. And I know that takes skills to get to that point, which you share a lot in your book, your previous book, but also you integrate it into this book, especially. But the one thing I would like to know, for people that have had this career they've been in for so long, a lot of people get wrapped up in that identity that they are this because of what they do. How did that transition for you? Like, how did you form this new identity that okay, I'll try this. Now I'm an author. Now I'm a speaker. Because a lot of people get so attached to, especially being in a career for so long, you get attached to that identity. How did you let go and mold to these new identities, if you want to say?
Well, I had been fired, right? So the thing is, in my situation, there wasn't really, I couldn't decide to stay in media. When I took my position as CRO, I signed a non-compete, non-solicit for a year and a half anywhere in the world that I would not be in the media business if
Wow.
I left that company for any reason. So my hand was really forced. I'm a single mom, so I needed to work. I needed to pay my bills, but I couldn't stay in the industry that I had expertise in, right? I had to start over somewhere. That was really just the hard discussion I had with myself was, okay, I've got to start over as a beginner somewhere. Where do I want to start over as a beginner? And that, I didn't decide on what that would be or what that would look like. That took months to understand, but I just knew that I had to let go of what had been. There was no going back. I could go back, but it would have to be a year and a half later. So I still had to figure out what that year and a half was going to look like and how I could earn income. And it just unfolded, one step at a time. It wasn't some big revelation or big transition. But what was interesting is after 2 decades, in corporate America, immediately when my new book came out, when you Googled me, I showed up as an author. And it basically erased the past 2 decades of my career that I'd worked so hard for and had found so much success in. And I remember the day that I saw that and I thought, wow, look how quickly things can ultimately change. And look at the internet recognizing me as an author when I don't even know what I'm doing. So it was just that little moments like that where you start recognizing, you know what, things can change just as quickly as you want them to.
And actually, I know you share a lot of that on Instagram. You speak about like how quickly things unfolded for you and you give the timeline, which is so inspiring. It inspires me. I'm sure it inspires so many people that doesn't matter. And you speak about this too. It doesn't matter your age, doesn't matter what you were doing last year. It could change in a moment's time. So you share this so openly and it's so inspiring. So I really want to acknowledge that because it's so true that, and we've seen it all around us, especially in the transition from 2020 to 2021 is people are reinventing themselves left and right. And so there's so many possibilities more than ever, of course, as we know. The one thing I know you speak about before or after you got fired, you were realizing that you were ignoring certain signs. And I think this is important to bring up because you talk a lot about listening to your intuition and listening to that inner voice of that's guiding you and not ignoring those signs. So if you were to go back to your previous self in that career, and for anybody else that's listening right now that is possibly ignoring those signs that we know is right in front of us, what advice would you give?
Yeah, for a long time, I was turning a blind eye to bad behavior. That woman treated me terribly, and I would just ignore it because when I think about it, I was afraid of addressing it meant that I would have to deal with her head on. I knew she was the CEO's daughter, so I knew if there ever came, a call someone was going to have to make, she'd get the call just because she's a family member, and I wasn't. So I was really just afraid of losing my position, afraid of upsetting this woman further. And so I just decided to ignore the behavior. What happened over that 14-year time was she grew in power. She treated me worse and worse. It accelerated by ignoring the bad behavior. I thought it might go away, but it grew and it grew into a really awful situation that I ultimately I started losing my hair. I threw my back out. I started physically having all of these issues. It was like the universe trying to get my attention to say, this is not healthy for you. This is not good for you. And, I was crying at night, not wanting to go to work the next day. It really became really awful. And so, for anyone listening that has a situation like that, where you need to do something, but you're not doing it, the universe will bring you there, one way or another. So you can either choose to address it, which I did not. I chose to ignore it to the last day. Even walking into the day she was going to fire me, I didn't think she was going to fire me. So I would just say that either you can make the decision or you can allow the universe to make it for you. And in my situation, that's what happened, right? I ended up getting fired by this woman. So I ignored bad behavior for a long time and I didn't want to deal with it. And I never really did. It's a lot harder. I could have made it a lot easier on myself had I started a side hustle years ago. Hypothetically, had I had the conversation with myself, okay, this woman hates you. You're going to be out eventually. Why don't you start something on the side? So basically, you're acknowledging what's really happening. And I could have, started a side company and have been in a much better situation to leave, whether it was when she wanted me to or when I wanted to, had I been taking those steps. But I hadn't been taking them because I was just, I was turning a blind eye to it and trying not to deal with it. So anyone that's listening, going through a situation like that, either you can ignore it or the universe will just get you to deal with it in the universe time. But it's easier if you decide to address it in your timeline.
So true. So true. No matter what, it's going to happen. And also, you speak a lot about not dimming your light and really owning your voice. And I think a lot of people are being that way, somewhat dimming their light and, muting their voice because they don't want to be judged. And I know you speak a lot about that because this plays into the confidence thing. What can you speak towards that and how to really own our voice and just stand in our light and not be afraid of those judgments that might come along the way?
For me, I used to think maybe if I would dim my light, it would make her feel more comfortable. It was clear she wasn't comfortable around me. I knew that much, right? So I thought, okay, maybe if I change my behavior, she'll respond differently to me. That backfired yet again. That was not the right answer, right? So I was dimming my light. I wasn't showing up as the most powerful version of myself. In meetings, I would try to, be a little bit more quiet than usual, not contribute as much. And what was interesting is not only did that impact her, it allowed her to feel like she was above me, larger than me. She intensified her voice and amplified it while I lessened mine. But also other people started noticing a difference in me too, so that was a byproduct that I had not anticipated. And other people started treating me as lesser than, and, not as that powerful version of myself. And ultimately I ended up saying, okay, I've got to recreate confidence in myself. I don't like who I'm becoming. I'm becoming a B-rate version of myself. It's not helping my situation at all. Right. My whole strategy that this was going to help her feel better about herself and leave me alone, that was not happening. So I decided I'm going to amplify the voice again. I'm going to come back as that strong, powerful version of myself that I have been. And I think a lot of people have experienced this. Confidence can have ebbs and flows, right? So there's times in your life where you feel on top of the world and super confident. And then there's times where you feel like a complete rookie, that you have no idea, insecure and full of self-doubt. And, to acknowledge that and say, okay, I intentionally want to do something about this. Here's what my goal is. I want to be that powerful version of me. I'm going to take very specific steps to make it happen. I'm going to give myself a timeline. I gave myself 30 days, right? So I got really clear on what I wanted to do. And the more you recognize and address it, then you've got to hold yourself accountable to it. And I thought, okay, the next meeting, I'm stepping up for myself. She used to always ignore me when I would walk into meetings. And so I decided I'm going to address it. I'm not going to allow anyone to ignore me. I deserve to be recognized for, I warrant a seat at that table and in that meeting, and I'm going to claim it. And I did that. She walked right by me and ignored me. And I waved, hi, good morning. It's so great to see you. I don't think you saw me over here. And what I recognize now is that probably was the day that, put the final nail in the coffin, because she was so angry that I did that. But for me, that was also the day I decided to say, I'm coming back as the strongest version of myself. And that empowered me so much. That started me down the path to empower me, that the day she did fire me, she tried to pressure me into signing a gag order and I wouldn't do it. And if I hadn't been working on my confidence behind the scenes, if I hadn't had the strategy and goal that I was, personally and privately working on, I probably would have let her bully me one last time. I probably would have signed it, but I was in such a different headspace by the time she did fire me that I pushed right back on her, and I took all the power out of that room, and it completely changed the dynamic in that room in 30 seconds.
That's amazing. I love that. And I think when it comes to somebody dimming their light or muting their voice is the first awareness, like what is going on. And if somebody is taking your power away and how to take it back. And I love that you kind of gave yourself a deadline to take action towards it. So that's super important for people to do. So let's talk about your newest book, Overcome Your Villains. First of all, what led you to write this book? What, from creating confidence to now this book, what was the catalyst to this book?
So I believe that data doesn't lie. So I'm always keeping Word docs where I put notes of what people are asking me for, what posts are resonating, what's performing well, because if something's performing well, that's a key identifier for you that there's something here. So from the time I wrote Confidence Creator, immediately I started getting DMs from people. Well, what happened next? Well, how did you, from basically Confidence Creator ends with me getting fired. And so, everyone's asking, okay, but then how did you go from fired to delivering a TEDx talk, to becoming a top speaker, to launching a podcast host and having Gary Vee on it? How did these things happen? How did you bounce back so fast? Those same questions were filling my inbox from the day I launched Confidence Creator still till now. And it's ironic. I still get people asking me that now. I'm like, go buy the book, for the love of God. This is why I created the book, right?
Yeah.
So I basically, whenever I see that there's a theme or a trend in what my community is asking me for, I know there's some value there that they're going to really appreciate. So that was really the concept for the book, was I was answering the questions that I received most often on social media. And then a mentor of mine had reached out to me during this process, probably back in 2019. And I'm always asking people who are ahead of me, hey, what am I missing? What am I not doing? What could I do better? And he shared, one thing I've noticed that you're not doing is you don't have a simplistic, repeatable process. You need to distill down whatever it is that Heather Monahan does to bounce back so that everyone can have that same formula. And it might sound simple or easy, but we all do things unconsciously or subconsciously in life. Like I wasn't strategically sitting around when I got divorced saying, how am I going to bounce back from this? What's my process? I was just doing it, right? I was just being me, and I wasn't thoughtful around that. So when he forced me to sit down and really challenge myself to say, what does that process look like? I had to go back to when my boyfriend cheated on me after college and I was devastated. I had to go back to when I got sexually harassed at work. I had to go back to the 08-09 recession, all these different moments in my life where I went through really hard times, but I was able to flip the script on the challenge and come out on top. And so I was whiteboarding all the different things that I was doing. And I was finally able to distill it down to a 3-step process, that's really the format for the entire book, is how to put this 3-step process into motion in your life so that you can constantly face challenges and overcome them very quickly.
That's amazing. And I think just by you sharing that with us, the question that was asked to you and really what was needed for you to go to the next level, that's a lesson for all of us to listen to, because think about in your business or your life right now, how can you develop possibly a framework to teach others? Because I think that is often, you see that often across the board, that there's this framework, there's these, letters put together that forms this, and this is the framework that you follow. So I think that's something that a lot of people could consider in what they're teaching, of a framework to easily teach somebody else to do something. So I know your framework is called BAK, right? It's BAK. Back. Okay. So BAK, can you explain what that is?
Yeah, the concept's really, to go back to a time when we weren't concerned what other people thought about us, right? When you see babies and they're trying to learn how to walk, they're not stopping all the time and taking a look over to say, oh gosh, are they judging me? They keep falling and they keep getting right back up. They fall, they get right back up. They fall, they laugh, they get right back up. And so the back process is taking you back to that time where you weren't concerned with what other people thought of you. You were concerned about what you had as a goal in front of you, and you were going to pursue it no matter what. So the 3 different steps are beliefs, action, and knowledge. And I'll give the example of when I got fired. Step 1 is to distill that belief, whatever belief it is, down to the most simplistic shred of fact, if there is any. And oftentimes there's not. So for me, I remember I walked out of that office that day I got fired saying, I've lost everything. I kept saying that over and over again. I've lost everything. I've lost everything. I don't know what I'm going to do. And the more I would say that, the more upset, I would become, and the further I'd be away from moving things forward and changing my situation. So I had to stop myself and say, wait a minute, did I really lose everything? I've got to question this, right? I've got to distill the belief to the most simplistic fact. And what I discovered was I lost a paycheck. That I did lose, but I didn't lose my health. I didn't lose my network. I didn't lose my unique value proposition. I didn't lose my expertise. I didn't lose anything. I lost a paycheck. And the more I thought about that paycheck, I had gone different places to get different paychecks in my life and career, right? This was not the only paycheck I had had for my whole entire life. So once I recognized what that belief really was, it was a lie that I was telling myself, I felt so much more empowered to take a next step. And the key process in the back process is to, number two, immediately take action, right? So you distill the belief down to the most simplistic fact you can find. Number two, you take action immediately. So my action step was I posted on social media immediately. I've been fired. If I ever helped you in any way, I need to hear from you now. That post went viral, as I mentioned, so I immediately took action. The post went viral. So many people asking to help me, so many people offering things. I converted those opportunities in the moment, further action. And that landed me on the Elvis Duran show, which leads me to knowledge, which the third part of the process is be really intentional around the knowledge that you're accessing. And by that, I mean, I was surrounding myself with someone who was light years ahead of me, right? Elvis Duran's beyond successful, has so many years, of personal success and personal knowledge of, the challenges he's overcome. So I was in the right company. I was choosing the right people to surround myself with and asking him for knowledge, and then him imparting that knowledge on me, that he saw me writing a book, that he believed it was possible for me. That knowledge, I was able to take that on from him and run with it. So, the knowledge portion is really, don't ask people who haven't been where you're going for directions, and instead be open to those people that are light years ahead of you, to surround yourself and ask them for their knowledge, because when they impart it on you, they're already living that life that you're looking to live. It's going to be really strong direction.
So powerful. And I completely agree. I think it's, do you know who Greg Reed is? So Greg Reed, he says, seek counsel, not opinion, which is kind of the same type of thing, as like, you don't, when you go to somebody, especially people that are not where you want to go, just, say thank you for that advice and move on. But if somebody is actually light years ahead, like you said, that's who you're counseling. It's not like you're looking for opinions. So it's a really powerful thing to really make sure you're not asking people that are not where you want to go, and taking that advice and riding with it. Because I know that when you first self-published your book, you were getting opinions from other people. And of course they were deterring you away from writing your book. But luckily, because you didn't listen to those opinions, you spoke to somebody that's already written many, many books. And that obviously, that's why you became an author. So if you could kind of share that story, because I think that's really powerful as well.
Yeah, I had, and this is to that exact point, don't take advice or direction from someone who hasn't been where you want to go. I had shared with my family that I was writing a book 2 weeks before it was coming out. And my mother stopped talking to me, and my sister told me I was going to get sued and I could not move forward with the book. And she's an attorney. And so for about 60 seconds, I thought, okay, I can't do this. I've got to cancel the book. But then I called my editor, and, that was a really smart decision. That's the knowledge and the knowledge process of Overcome Your Villains. It's about being intentional about who you're accessing knowledge from. And meaning I was accessing knowledge from my family, who's written 0 books, when I needed to be accessing knowledge from my editor, who's written 19 books. And so I got on the phone with my editor. I explained to him what they had said, and he laughed and said, "You don't think that anyone's ever told me I shouldn't write one of my books?" I said, "I don't know." He said, "Of course they have." He said, "I just chose not to listen." He said, "Anyone can sue you for anything, Heather." So I find it, a little troublesome that we've worked for the past few months on writing a book. You've got an amazing book written, that you're going to stop now for a chance of something that may or may not happen. And then he asked me his closing question, which is, who did you write this book for? Why did you write this book? And the more I leaned into that why and thought about, it was to help other people, it was to give a roadmap to somebody who might need it. None of that changed based upon my mother and my sister's opinions. And again, they weren't trying to be harmful. This was just how they felt and their thoughts. And then he asked me the final question, which was, how many books has your family written? And once I heard myself say 0, it was so obvious to me never to be taking direction from somebody who hasn't been where you're going.
Yep. So true. Okay. So what is a villain in your terms? When you say overcome your villains, can you explain that?
Yeah, there's a lot of different villains out there, right? The pandemic is a villain in my life. Yeah, I can't stand the global pandemic. I hate being at home all the time, isolated, right? Like truly, that's something in my life that's been a villain to me. A villain can be a toxic work environment. A villain can be a nasty boss, like I had. A villain can be a frenemy that is not supporting you, but is instead sabotaging you quietly. There's sneaky villains out there, right? But the biggest villain any of us are ever going to truly have to encounter is the one that lies between our own two ears. And I'm a firm believer that once you overcome the villains around you, you can address the one that's within you.
Mm, yes, it's so true. Definitely the most powerful villain is the one between our ears. But let's talk about the external ones because you talk about firing those from your life. So if somebody has certain villains that are surrounding them that they really don't have control of, how does somebody fire that from their life? Like, how would you use an example in your life? What's a current villain? You talk about the pandemic, but any other villains in your life? Like, how do you remove them from your life or
I
address
mean,
it?
I've gotten pretty good at removing villains from my life, right? Because I've been working on this book for 2 years. So it's top of mind for me every single day. An example would be a frenemy that I had. And it was actually another girlfriend pointed out to me. I had gone to lunch with this woman, and when I came back, I was just not in a good mood. My energy was drained. I was doubting myself. I felt like I looked awful. Just everything was off. And my good girlfriend said to me, who have you been around today? Like, what's going on with you right now? You don't seem like yourself. And when I mentioned the woman's name, she said, I have to tell you something. I've never really liked her. I think she's a friend of me. And it was an epiphany moment that I thought, wow, had I been strategically evaluating how I feel every time I leave this woman's presence, I would note I never walk away feeling good. Every single time I feel drained. There's people out there that will give you energy and give you joy, and there are people that will suck the life out of you. And this was one of those women that, yes, she smiled, and yes, she was very nice. And I'm sure it wasn't intentional. I don't think it was, but she just wasn't the right fit for me at that point in time in my life. And so what I decided to do, there's many different ways to handle it. The way I handled it with her was I didn't want to get into a big controversy with her. I just didn't want to spend time with her anymore because I didn't want to have the energy sucked out of my life. So as she would call and say, hey, let's go to lunch Friday, I'd say, oh, unfortunately, I'm fully committed Friday. We'll have to catch up another time. Have a great day. And I would make it very simple, very short. And I wouldn't explain myself, right? No is a complete sentence. I wouldn't tell why. But after a few of those responses, I stopped hearing from her. And again, it doesn't mean she's a bad person. It just means in the way she impacted me was not beneficial to me. And slowly I started feeling a lot better about myself. I stopped self-doubting so much because for whatever it was about her and her responses and the way she looked at me and the way she handled herself, it definitely left me feeling less than. And when I did not have to spend time with her anymore, I started feeling a lot better.
Yeah, I could only imagine. I think a lot of people have those people that suck our energy and doesn't, there's people that fan your flames or that put out your flames. So we have to be mindful of that. And that's the easy way to address it is, keeping it short and simple. And eventually that person will stop contacting you if you're never available. And
Yeah.
so the biggest thing that we need to address is the villain between our ears. So what advice or process do you recommend people go to start addressing that? I know one of the things, as you were saying, is really getting down to facts, not just, certain beliefs we have. So what would be another path to really overcome our villain that we have internally?
Yeah. So dismantling that belief in any situation is going to be the first step. I mean, it's so critically important because so often what you'll find is that, and for example, when I had the idea, or if I didn't have the idea, when Elvis Duran had the idea for me to write a book, immediately I thought to myself, oh, I can't write a book, right? I immediately started giving myself a belief that wasn't real. There was zero shred of fact to that. And so I recognized I was telling myself a story from the time I was a child that my sister was a smart one and that I was a social one. And I was holding on to a story that never had any proof, never had any fact. Yes, my sister is super smart, but that didn't mean I wasn't smart, right? So there was some way that I was harming myself holding on to a story that had zero factual basis. So I would definitely suggest that anyone and everyone start there with figuring out what story have you been telling yourself that's holding you back, that has no fact base to it, and what challenge are you facing right now, and what is a story that you're telling yourself, or the belief you're holding around that now, and dismantle it down to the most simplistic fact that you can find. And 9 out of 10 times you're going to find there's no fact there.
And then the whole thing, taking action. You are completely an action taker. You wouldn't be where you are right now if you didn't take the action and the steps you did to get there. So I'm just curious. Obviously, you've created a very successful podcast, paid speaker. What are some actions you have taken, even though you didn't have per se the confidence to go after it because you weren't yet a podcast host, you weren't yet a paid speaker? What would you say to somebody that needs to take that step and create those opportunities that possibly weren't there?
For me, every time I've done it, it becomes easier the next time, right? So I always keep a file on those times that I've stepped into unknown. Writing a book was my first real big, getting fired was the first real big one, right? And then writing a book was another real big one. And then doing a TEDx talk was another big, right? So I start amassing all these examples for myself to show myself, oh, stepping into unknown. Oh yeah, I know how to do that. Oh, stepping into something I've never done before, doing it all the time. Oh, this is gross when I feel like this, when I get scared and I'm showing up as a beginner. So the more I condition myself to say, this is actually my new normal now, is that I step into things. If I'm not feeling scared, if I'm not showing up as a beginner, I'm not growing. And that's a tragedy versus the way I used to see it, which was, oh my gosh, I'm afraid. Everybody slow down. I need to go hide right now from whatever problem's going on instead of tackling it, even if I was a rookie at it. So, I've really reframed the way that I look at growth, the way that I look at fear. I see fear as a green light that means go and go faster. And I constantly look back on these other social proofs in my life that, you know what, this is probably going to work out pretty well too, because the book worked out, the TEDx talk worked out, the podcast worked out. I'll figure it out along the way. And for a lot of us, I think that we didn't know, successful people don't know the how, but they bet on themselves to figure it out along the way. And that's what I'm learning to live now.
I love that. And I've heard you speak about actually the process in getting this book published, because like we said, that the first one was self-published and then this one's published. So if you could share how you actually got to the point of publishing this book, because I know it wasn't an immediate yes. So I would love for anybody that wants to be an author, published, self-published, what did you do and what can we learn from you in the process that you went through?
Well, what I realized is that I have expertise in sales. That's something that I'm very good at. What I didn't realize is sales isn't just handy or useful in a sales environment. It's handy and useful as an author. It's handy and useful as someone who wants to be an author. It's handy and useful in all aspects of life. So I've taken my sales skills and brought them with me to becoming an entrepreneur. And what that looked like was I decided, okay, I wrote and self-published the first book. Now I want to try doing a traditional book. Let's look for the biggest opportunity out there. So it was 2019 and I Googled who is the most successful female nonfiction author. And it was Rachel Hollis at the time. And so I Googled Rachel Hollis's agent and I found the woman's name and I went to her website and I did what I would do with anything. I'm going into a pitch. So I put myself in the other person's shoes, right? And I think, what's important to them? What are they afraid of? Why would they say no? How can I add value? All these same questions that I ask all the time. And I came up with a pitch that, listen, you've got the blueprint for success around this nonfiction author, female author world. I am not competitive to Rachel Hollis. She's very strong into stay-at-home mom and religion. And those are, I don't talk about those things. However, I am a female author. I am in the nonfiction world, but I lean on the business side. Maybe we can use that same blueprint that you already created that was super successful, pop it over here, not being competitive, but adding a new revenue stream for you and not upsetting your existing roster of authors. And so immediately I heard back and she thought, oh, that sounds like a great idea. Let's get on a call. So as we got on a call, she discovered that I did not have a book proposal. And I didn't know what a book proposal was. She asked me, I'd written a book. Back in 2019, I'd already written a book. It was a starting point for this book. But I thought, I've got this book, it's done, basically. And I said, I'll send you the book. She said, I don't want a book. I want a book proposal. And I said, well, I don't have that. And I don't know what a book proposal is. And she said, this is where our conversation ends. And I said, let me ask you one last question before you hang up. If you had a family member that was wanting to write a book proposal, who would you send them to? And she said, Peter Economy. And I said, okay, you'll hear from me soon enough. And so I went to Twitter and I tweeted at Peter Economy, Peter, you can't believe this. Jill so-and-so just told me that you and I need to do a book proposal together for her. When do you have time to talk? And so he immediately called me, and I ended up investing in myself and hiring him to help me write a book proposal. And over the next few months, we wrote a book proposal. We sent it back to Jill to pitch our idea. And she said no. And she said, you can do better. And she said no to me 14 times. And on the 15th time, she finally said yes.
What changed to make her say yes? Do you know?
It constantly was, improving. I had never done a book proposal before, so I'm not good at it, right? Anytime you show up new at something, you're not going to be great at it. And I've accepted that, right? So the only way you're going to grow and get better is to go back and try and practice and improve, and make changes. And so she just really pushed me to make that proposal as great as it could be. And it ended up great because we got, I think, 6 or 7 publishing houses that made offers to buy the book.
Wow, that's incredible. I love how resourceful you are. That's one thing you definitely are. You ask the right questions to steer you in the right direction, which is phenomenal. So the one question I want to know, so this interview will be in 2022. So a lot of people have big goals. And like we touched on earlier in the interview, you share your timeline of how quickly things could change and how quickly things could happen and manifest. So for somebody that has big goals this year, what would you say to them to make that a reality? Like reverse engineer, what would you share?
Yeah, write the goal down. That's number one. Most people will write down their grocery list for Whole Foods for the week because they don't want to forget something, but they don't write down their actual goals for the year. So that's step number one. Put it somewhere that you're going to see it every day, right? My goals are right next to my computer. I read, whether I want to read them or not, I'm reading them every single day. Some days it's tougher because you're saying, oh gosh, I haven't achieved this yet. But forcing yourself to keep that goal top of mind, get specific around it, right? You want to give yourself a deadline. Like, what does that timeline look like? And start thinking about what are some of the ways that I can get there. Again, you don't always have to have the right answer or the answer. That will unfold along the way, but you have to have different ideas to test and try to move you closer towards your goal. Another way that I've reverse engineered is I've gone to social media to say, hey, I have a new book coming out, when I really hadn't written the book yet, or I didn't have the book proposal, but I knew it would put pressure on me to get moving, because then I'd get DMs from people, hey, what's going on with that book? When's that book going to come out? Right. So that's a great way to leverage social media to put to work for you. Get an accountability partner, somebody that will check in with you to keep you on task and keep you moving forward. Momentum is so important. And, for many of us, life will happen and something, goes wrong and you don't have time to focus on something. It's great to have someone that is on your team check in with you to say, hey, I know you're going through a tough time right now, but I just want to make sure you're still working towards your goal for the year. Where are you with things? How can I help? Those are the kind of people that you want to be checking in with you.
Amazing. I love that. So of course I want everybody to grab your book, Overcome Your Villains. But if you were to pull out just one chapter that you feel it could stand on its own, what would that chapter be? And what is the message behind it?
Well, there's 2, and I actually read them on my podcast so that anyone can, and you can also, I think Amazon has them both as well. You can press a button that says, take a peek inside the book and you can read it. Or you can listen to the Audible version of the first 2 chapters too. And so the first chapter is really telling the behind the scenes story of what happened the day I got fired, which I had not publicly shared before. And so it's sort of interesting. I think you think at a high level, like, oh, that was probably hard, but it really breaks down how hard that really was and what going through an awful experience really feels like. The feedback that I get is people feel less alone after they read that chapter. They recognize that, oh, wow, other people get that upset or other people struggle that much. I thought I was the only one. So I think that that's really helpful for people. It's also, reframing this idea of you've been rejected. No, I see it as being redirected to something much bigger. I didn't know it at the time, but hopefully for those reading it, they're able to see whatever challenge you're going through. Maybe it's not a rejection right now. Maybe it's a redirection. You just don't know what door is about to open for you. I certainly did not. And I break that all down in that first chapter. The second chapter is around the back process and explaining the back process and giving insight. And I give examples in really short way in that one chapter for people to see how they can leverage that process for their life to get over any adversity, whether it's in business or it's in their personal life, and move quickly. So I just think that's a really helpful chapter for people.
Amazing. And I honestly, what I love is you share your experiences and then the lesson to take away from that, which I think is so great because in everything I see you've done, you are so resourceful and you are like, I'm going to get this done. You always have your vision, your end vision in mind, and that compelling why to get there. And then you reverse engineer and you break it down, and you take a step and another step. So I think it's phenomenal. So I think so many people can learn from you. And especially, like I mentioned, it's so inspiring to hear from somebody that has built their life in one career and has completely pivoted out of it. And, for people that are either in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, whatever it may be, it's never too late, which you completely inspire people to do that. So I'm so thankful for that because you inspire me.
Well, I'll tell you, but
Yeah.
people did say to me when I wanted to launch a podcast, you're too late to the game. There's too many podcasts out there. It's not going to work. And my show has done incredibly well. It amazes me how well my show's done, right? So it's not up to what other people see as possible for you. It's only up to what you see as possible for yourself.
Yeah. And the only limitations are really the limitations we put on ourselves. That's so true. Oh my gosh. Yes. Well, okay. Just to close off, I always ask my guests, and I don't know what you said the previous time, I would have to go back, but I always ask my guests, if you were to leave one piece of advice, it could be anything, just a life lesson that you feel anybody needs to hear right now. What would that be?
Just go bigger as we're looking at 2022 and the things that you're going to go after. Whatever it is, double down on it. For a long time when I was in corporate America, I wasn't giving myself big goals. I wasn't stepping into fear on the regular. You can literally retrain yourself to do these things. If I've been able to do it, anybody else can too. But it starts with coming up with that really big goal and tuning everybody else out and getting crystal clear on it, and just start taking those steps. Leverage that back process to overcome the challenges that are going to come in your way. They're going to come. We know they're going to come, but don't let that deter you. It just might redirect you to a new path to get there.
Powerful. I love it. Thank you so much for that, Heather. This has been such an honor. Where can people best find you? Of course, what's your podcast? Everybody knows the book will be in the show notes, Overcome Your Villains. Where can people best find you?
So I'm at Heather Monahan everywhere on all social media. My podcast is called Creating Confidence with Heather Monahan. You can find it anywhere you get your podcast. And if you go to overcomeyourvillains.com, enter your order number for the new book, you get my $500 bonus bundle for free, my $299 confidence video course for free, my Overcome Your Villains workbook for free, my 30-day email accountability program for free. And it will really, that bundle is going to help you achieve all of your goals in 2022.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Heather. It's been so great connecting with you again and being in the space with you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you.